If you've ever looked at your camera roll and realized, wow, there are literally no good photos of my children and I, case in point, then this video is gonna help you fix that. I'm gonna show you the exact settings for how to take great photos of you and your kids using a super simple setup at home that doesn't feel awkward, performative, or complicated. Because I know how this goes. We end up with hundreds, if not thousands, of adorable photos of our children and our significant other, and somehow we are just ghosts. But your kids want photos with you. Maybe not today, but at some point in their lives, they are going to want photos of their mom, so we're gonna make sure that happens today. And the first thing you need to do this is really simple. You need a tripod and or something to hold your camera. Tripod is obviously the preferred method to hold your camera. It's the safest method. But if you need something in a pinch, a human tripod can also work. A sturdy bookshelf or a counter can possibly work, but I don't recommend it. Now, when you start looking for a tripod to buy, you're gonna see that there's about 800 million options, much like when you started looking for a camera to buy. So I've linked some favorites down in the description of this video. But the most important thing to look for is, can the tripod hold the weight of my particular camera and lens? So do a quick search on your camera body and your lens weight, add them together, make sure that your tripod is going to be able to hold that particular weight, okay? If you're using a phone, you can get a nifty little attachment like this one I have. That's a MagSafe one, so I can easily take my phone on and off. But if you're using a real camera, you're gonna need some kind of tripod head that will then connect the camera to the tripod. Again, all of that is linked in the description of this video, so don't panic if you don't know what I'm talking about. Now, if you don't have a tripod and you don't plan on buying one, and the other thing you can do is use a human tripod. Now, if you've ever used a human tripod before, where you hand your device off to someone, you know that sometimes you can get back crooked, blurry, weird photos where you're blinking. So to avoid that, I recommend go ahead and set up all of your camera settings beforehand, take a mock photo without you in it, and show the person what you're aiming for, right? Show them how your lines are straight and neat, how you've already done the exposure settings for them if you're using a real camera. Teach them how to focus. That's something that I've messed up several times with my husband, is assuming that if I put my autofocus area point dead smack in the middle, he's gonna be able to focus on myself and my children, and that has failed me many times. So make sure that you at least give a quick instruction and or go ahead and open the autofocus area mode up so that there's less wiggle room for them to accidentally bump the point off of you and your children, okay? Learn from my mistakes. I have lost many a cute photo to that particular point. And now if you're feeling like Megan, I am not about to drag a tripod out in public, set it up, take photos of myself and my kids in front of other people, that's totally okay. Most of the examples in this video were actually taken inside my home because I am also not particularly fond of putting on a show for other people outside. So don't worry. Now, once your camera is set up, let's go ahead and talk about the settings that you're gonna need to take a self-portrait. So all devices, for the most part, I can't think of one that doesn't, have at the very minimum what we call a self-timer. So you've probably used it on your phone before and you're gonna see that typically it's gonna give you a 3-second option or a 10-second option. And where you're adjusting that on a real camera is called the drive mode. So you're telling your camera how you want the shutter release to be controlled. So under the drive mode, you can select the self timer for 3 seconds, 10 seconds. Sometimes you can input how many seconds you want. And what that's gonna do is delay the release of your shutter, or that time when the camera is taking the photo, to that specific amount of time. So you'll press the button, you'll have maybe 3 seconds to run into the frame, then it will take a photo. And it takes one single photo. Now, if you want to add another layer to that, you can add to that drive mode a remote shutter release tool, or camera remote, but the fancy term is a shutter release tool. And so those can look like two different things. It can look like a little remote with a little button on it that you link up to your camera, and then you can try to hide that in your photo while you're taking a picture. The next type of remote that you can use is actually your phone. So depending on your brand, so Canon has an app called Canon Connect, and then Sony and Nikon are gonna have their own apps with different names, which I don't know what they are, but we can look them up later. They'll be in the description of this video. And so once you've connected your camera to the app, and again, not all cameras can do this, anything within the last 10 years probably can though. And then you're gonna be able to not only release the shutter, press the shutter from your phone, from this app, you're also going to be given a remote live shooting mode where you can see what's happening in your viewfinder, change settings, tap to focus. And it is nice to be able to control everything from your phone. The only tricky part, again, is where do you hide your phone in the image to where you're not looking down. But it's a great option if you want a remote shutter tool and you want to be able to decide when the photo is being taken. Now, there's one more option besides our human tripod option, our self-timer option, and the remote shutter release option, okay? And that option is called the interval timer. And this is actually by far my favorite because those candid photos are what I feel like is really missing from my camera roll feed. I feel like because I'm a photographer, I think to take cute photos of things that my husband is doing with our children, right? That I think are adorable and I want to remember. I have a photographer's brain, so I think to take a photo of that. My husband does not have a photographer's brain and he does not think to take photos of those things very often unless I tell him to. So that's what I feel like is missing. So those are the types of photos that I'm aiming to take typically. And with the interval timer, and not all cameras have this, unfortunately, and you should probably just look now before you watch this segment to see if yours has it. Otherwise, you might be extremely bummed. But essentially, you can go into your settings, you can enable this interval timer, and then you're going to be able to choose how many seconds you want your camera to pause in between taking photos and how many photos in a row you want it to take. Okay, so for example, I could say I want you to take 30 photos and I want you to pause for 2 seconds in between each photo. This is a really great and really the only totally hands-free way to take a photo other than that self-timer where you're running in, but that gets kind of chaotic and really exhausting. And I feel like can lead to more focusing errors than the interval timer where you're just running in one time. You're gonna enable it, you're gonna press the shutter, you're gonna run into the frame once, and then you just get settled and start engaging with your children and it's gonna rattle off as many photos as you told it to with as much spacing in between each photo as you told it to. So something I like to do is do a shorter burst of images at first just to check my composition, my exposure, see that the focusing isn't like completely off. And then I'll go back and do maybe 1 or 2 more rounds of these of 30 photos in a row with 2 seconds in between. So like 2 minutes of photos is really all you need, right? Now, when it's done with a round, you do have to go back and enable it again and hit the shutter again, but it's just my favorite hands-free option for taking photos. Now, the trickiest part of self-portraits, much like taking any photo, is actually the focusing and making sure that you and your children are in focus, okay? So if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I'm a firm believer in a continuous autofocusing mode when we're talking about working with children because children are what? Wiggly. So once you've got your continuous autofocusing mode turned on, so on Canon, that's gonna be AI Servo. On Nikon and Sony, you're going to look up for AFC, C for continuous. Then you also, on an older camera, want to open up that autofocus area mode to something wide so it can look across the screen for some movement to capture. On a newer camera, if you have a newer mirrorless, for example, you're going to want to turn on your subject detection and set it to people, and then also turn on your eye detection. Then to make it even easier, if you have this setting, you can also turn on whole area tracking. And that's gonna give your camera kind of free rein to find some eyeballs, lock onto them and take a photo. If you wanna control where it starts to look for that eyeball, then you can use a smaller autofocus area mode and set the point there. And you're basically telling it, hey, first we're gonna be somewhere over here. Look for the eyeballs over here. Those are the ones I want you to prioritize. Another quick tip, which does make a difference, is also your aperture setting, because your aperture setting controls your depth of field or how far you can see clearly into your image. So if you're not familiar with aperture, then one general rule of thumb you can use is to match your aperture number with the number of people in your photograph. So if you're photographing 3 people, for example, look for an aperture of f/3 something. Match those 2 numbers. If you've got 5 people, f/5 something, okay? It's not an exact science, but if you're not familiar with aperture, it's a really good rule of thumb to use so that you don't use too shallow of a depth of field to get all of your people in focus unless they're standing in like a straight line. It's basically just gonna increase your odds of making sure everyone is in the focal plane. Now, if what's holding you back is not the camera, it's getting in front of the camera, then this next setting is for you. So something that I think makes photos feel really awkward is the posing or the idea of posing. And in particular, your hands, I think, make photos feel really awkward. So your hands want a job. They don't want to be wondering what to do like Ricky Bobby, okay? Give them a purpose in your image. Whether that is holding your child's hand, wrapping your arms around them, holding onto a book or a cup of coffee, playing with your hair, whatever. Let your hands do something so they're not just resting awkwardly, okay? It's just gonna help your photo feel a little bit more natural. And again, we've already talked about how in the photos that I'm talking about here, we're really aiming for more of those candid style images. We're not really expecting people to stand and stare at the camera and smile. So if your hands are doing something, that's also gonna make the candid moment feel a lot more authentic. Standing still and trying to pose is what's gonna make that image feel stiff. You've probably heard me say, I believe in prompting over posing. And in these kind of scenarios, the same thing is true. We're taking candid photos. They should probably actually be candid photos of us doing something with our children. So playing, reading a book, snuggling on the couch, eating breakfast together, something. If you just make that mental shift of we're not trying to capture a perfect moment, we're just capturing a candid moment, that alone is going to take so much pressure off and make the whole experience more enjoyable for everyone, honestly. And I want to go ahead and emphasize this, that your photos do not have to be perfect to be meaningful. They also don't have to be shared online to be meaningful. Your life deserves being documented exactly as it is. Your kids love you exactly as you are. In fact, they love you more than the sun and the moon and the stars all put together. And they are going to want these photos of you with them. Again, maybe not today, but at some point in their lives, they're going to be so glad to have them. You are a huge part of their story, so please get in the photo. And if you're watching this around Mother's Day, I want to say that I really hope you feel loved and celebrated, and know that the things that you do for your family day in and day out matter more than you probably realize. Good luck. I hope you're able to capture some really special memories with your family using the tips in this video.